So welcome to this two-part series on leading change. In this first segment, we want to look at some of the macro issues around how do you drive sustainable change and how much of it should be top-down driven versus bottom-up driven. In the second segment, we'll look at some of the specific strategies and tactics and approaches that drive more sustainable change. So let's start with this quote by a guy named Marv Weisbord that I think fundamentally gets at what I think is the main challenge around driving sustainable change. His observation, which he made over 40 years ago, was people have a hard time adopting policies and procedures they did not help to select or invent. It does not matter how good they are. We're saying again, people have a hard time adopting policies and procedures they did not help to select or invent. It does not matter how good they are. And I think this kind of gets at what is the fundamental challenge around really driving sustainable change that people in the rank and file positions ultimately own and sustain. If we don't involve them, about the best we can expect is compliance. So what I see going on in a lot of organizations today is, especially large organizations that announce these transformational change efforts, is it often ends up being a very top-down driven approach. And about the best they get in terms of a response, more often than not, is compliance. Now, if compliance is good enough for your industry and your business, great, stay with that approach. In many organizations, it's not. We really need to get folks at all levels involved and engaged in owning it and driving it and moving it forward. And that requires a different approach, which is what we want to talk a little bit about here. So let's talk a little bit at a macro level what that different approach entails. First, I think we have to stop mandating and start inviting people into the process. Now, people in general are going to want to come along because they want to see the organization succeed. So I think we don't have to worry about, if we don't make it mandated, people will not get behind it. I think they will. I think we need to kind of invite them as adults into the process. Know that at the end of the day, some may choose to opt out, but if they didn't really want to get behind it anyway, it's best that they leave. Second thing, we need to understand that we want to use more of an aspiration approach versus a fear approach. Aspiration taps into what's possible and what we'd like to get to ultimately, and engages people's openness and transparency and risk-taking. The fear-based approach, where we try to scare people into the future, doesn't bring out their best. So let's stay away from the fear-based approach. There's nothing wrong with giving people clear data around what's going on and what the trends are. They need to know that, but we don't need to scare them into the future by threatening or talking about all these awful things that can happen if we don't change behavior. Better to use the aspiration approach. The other thing I think we need to stop pretending is that this is a clean linear process, that we can plan out the change from start to end. Doesn't work that way. What we can do is we can have a clear intention of an end result we're trying to get to. But if we're serious about involving everyone, we got to understand that that's going to require some local experimentation. It's going to be much more iterative. It's going to be much more of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of approach. Sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That's just the nature of real change. And that is, there's a certain amount of, we're trying stuff, we're prototyping, and then we're getting feedback and then iterating. That's design thinking in a nutshell. So that's really what we need to kind of be clear about when we're starting to talk about how do we plan for this transformational change. The last thing I think we need to get leaders clear about is that they need to both be pointing out the small wins and drawing attention to them, and being very specific about the behaviors that we need to see in all of us. So what do we got to stop doing that's not helping us move forward? And what do we need to start doing in its place, and be very specific about what those behaviors are? So that kind of covers some of what I would call the macro issues around how do you drive real sustainable change and have it be just as much bottom-up driven as top-down driven. In the next segment, we'll look at some more specific things that you can do as leaders to really take a different approach to how we drive sustainable change. Look forward to seeing you there.